So has everyone managed to get some refreshment? That's good. So I just saw you have a you have a lovely smartphone here, right? That's the Samsung Galaxy Note. Really nice. So on the Sunzai market, you go across the Shenzhen, you can buy the copy for that for 1,000 yuan. Of course, it's not the same. The touch and feel not the same, but from a distance, you think, wow, that just looks like the exact one. It's amazing. So someone wrote let me go through a few questions, because this is your workshop tonight, not me, and I can go on forever. So the major challenges in the sourcing field. What are the major challenges in the sourcing field? I think a big challenge strategically is location of the sourcing. Where do we locate? Do we change our location? Do we go inland China? Do we go south? Do we go Vietnam? Where's the next China? Is Vietnam the next China? Well, Vietnam is very similar to Guangzhou in terms of size, and it's a very comparable. But Vietnam is more like a different province. Vietnam is more like another province of China. It's not a replacement for China. And unlike Guangdong, Vietnam is very fragmented in terms of municipal control rights. And so you have 90 different projects associated with deep sea ports currently at various stages being built in Vietnam. 90, not 9, not 19, but 90. And that's because it's very defragmented. And so potentially in Vietnam, it's probably too early to say that's a logical replacement for China, unless you are very clear about the ecosystem of services, logistical support that you have to support whatever operations you're doing. Okay. Having said that, in textiles, how many of you are closely associated with textile industry? Okay. Then people are trying out Cambodia, and then they're finding out the quality control, the consistency of the quality is better than operations in China. And then there's those that have operations in Bangladesh and Mexico, and they're having success there. So in terms of the big questions, the big macro questions about where do you locate your sourcing, no one place is good. When you go to these Southeast Asian nations and anywhere along the Silk Road, so we're extending China across to the Middle East, okay, and every country below that across to the Middle East. I think the big challenge is in the logistical support and having that product support. Okay, so if you're making a product, that's great, but have you got another company that can provide the packaging for that product? Okay, and can you be assured that the packaging will arrive on time? Because if the packaging doesn't arrive on time, you can't just have the machine spitting out products and you just stack them up and hope that the products will stay in good condition. You've got to, when products come off the assembly line, they've got to be packaged immediately. So there's a lot to depend on in terms of you go to other countries. There's a lot to depend on in the logistical support. So you have that in China. You have more certainty about that in China. So the challenges in sourcing is, well, if it's not, we decided we're staying in China, okay, or we're going inland, then one challenge, I talked to one German company, they have a joint venture in Dongguan, and they're making sort of transformers. So most of my stories are in the electronics area. And I said, so what's your challenge now? Our challenge now is to expand. I said, so what are you doing with expansion? Oh, we're setting up a new wholly owned factory in Shanghai. Shanghai? What are you... Unbelievable. Why would you set up in Shanghai? Like, number one, it's so far away from your joint venture you've had in Dongguan for the last 5 or 6 years. Number two, labour costs are higher. Like that's a financial centre. It's not a centre for manufacturing. Okay, so no, you don't. Look, it's so important as a multinational that we have transparency on all our transactions, and we're going to get that in Shanghai. We don't get that in Dongguan. The table is too high in Dongguan. You know what I mean? A lot of under the table stuff going on in Dongguan. So that's a challenge. That's got nothing to do with the labour costs. And so you have multinationals where they're coming out of the UK, Europe or USA, and they have to comply with this Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Then there's no choice. Okay, that's going to force a location choice. It's not about labour costs. And as I said earlier, in some ways labour costs is the last thing. Labour costs are going to go up everywhere anyway. Like even if you go down to Vietnam, Cambodia, labour costs are going to go up there anyway. I'll give you another story of a factory that European multinational, they moved their factory operations. What were they making? They were making power adapters. You know when you go around the world and, oh, my plug doesn't fit that one. So you push a button and the other things come out and then you can put it into the power. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so they make these, very nice design, everything. And said, oh, we've just moved our factory down to Thailand. Oh, that's interesting. I thought China, Guangdong was the ecosystem for electrical stuff. So, no, 3 reasons. Number one, IP protection. We just don't feel satisfied with the protection that we have got. We have so many hits on our website coming out of Guangdong. That's not our customers. That's our competition. All right? So people go to their website to find out the new designs to copy and things like that, right? Okay, number one. Number two, so we just had too many hiccups in terms of government regulations when we're actually sourcing across provinces in Guangdong from other provinces. And number three were the labour costs. Okay, so labour costs was number 3. So they went down to Thailand, and so I ran into the same person 6 months later, and he said, talking to him about, the move, how's it going? He said, yeah, not bad. The Bangkok government just put up the minimum wage by 50%. Okay, so what can you do? Okay, so I think the last reason to locate should be labour costs. That should be the last reason. All right, because there's uncertainty with that. There's uncertainty. If it's not the market that's driving it up, government making decisions just like that, new minimum wages, so forth. Okay, and any developing country, the risk of that happening is potentially high. So I think in terms of the challenge in sourcing is more protection of IP and making sure you have control over your R&D if you're outsourcing that. And that maybe if you're working with clients in Hong Kong that do the R&D, that's a potential angle of a niche market, because then you can say, look, we're based in Hong Kong, we charge more, but we can protect your IP. And not every company in China can promise that. Okay, so the challenge in the sourcing field, definitely still the IP. Okay, logistics, okay, we move inland. Yes, it's not about the cost, but maybe the delay, uncertainty with moving stuff, not the cost of moving stuff. Okay, because it costs half as much to ship goods from Sichuan to Futian in Shenzhen as it costs to ship from Hong Kong to LA. All right. No, wait a minute. It costs twice. I think it costs twice as much. Actually, yeah. All right. So there are a lot of logistical challenges associated with that, and even the train. Now you've got the fast train. If that goes into logistics, then that can improve too. Yes. So let's. Oh, no computer input. That must be the program that CPA Australia has when the speaker talks for too long. Okay, so let's. It's coming. I believe. Have we got it here? All right. So there's some of the challenges. Any questions before I talk anymore? Any questions on what I said? Agreement, disagreement? This is discussion. Okay. All right. Let me ask you. Yes. Yes. Do I have a plan to interview?
When you interview all those factories, do they have a plan to move to, outside Guangdong or outside?
Interesting. I've given you some examples of foreign companies. Like one moved from Guangdong to Thailand, then one moved from Dongguan to Shanghai. And if you talk about the locals, I'm thinking. I don't think they will move in a strategic, proactive sense. They'll set up in Dongguan and they will stay there. Okay, but they will move. I talked to one PCB manufacturer. So PCBs is big business. You all know what a PCB, printed circuit boards? Okay, so about 1/8 of all my interviews, no, about 1/10, 10% are PCB manufacturers. Very interesting. One PCB manufacturer had to move out of Shenzhen further inland. It wasn't a strategic decision. The government said, sorry, we've zoned the land. We don't want dirty industry. It's going to be for residential. Then they had to move. So my sense is they move when the provincial government says you have to move because now we don't want that dirty industry there now. Okay, now let's just back up a bit. What is the background for that? You've got to understand, what you need to realise is that Shenzhen is modernising very, very fast. And they're moving out, or they're not giving any incentives or making it very easy for the basic assembly industries to stay in Shenzhen. They're happy for them to move. There's no incentives. There used to be incentives 5 years ago, but now no more incentives. The Guangdong government definitely has a strategic plan to modernise Guangdong in terms of moving up the value chain. So they've approved two major automakers, Volkswagen and Peugeot, to set up factories. One in Fushan, one just out of Guangdong. And that's part of their push to actually, because traditionally automakers are out of Shanghai, right? And further north. Okay, but not in Guangdong. A lot of suppliers in Guangdong, but not automated, not final vehicle assemblies. And so now got two big foreign factories being set up in Guangdong. So generally in Guangdong, the Guangdong government sees they want to move up the value chain, and there is a push towards having the higher level technology sectors stay in Guangdong. So that's a positive thing. All right. Now, if you talk, so my sense is that no suppliers that I talk to move voluntarily. They'll actually move when they're asked to move. Yeah, and you've got to realise this is an ecosystem where it's sort of like families of factories that are sort of clustered together, and Dongguan is a very big cluster, especially for all the component manufacturers, especially going to the Sunzai market, and for some of the suppliers that will supply to Foxconn. Yeah, good question. More questions? Yes?
Yes. I saw a story this morning about the sports shoes manufacturer at Ipis.
Yes.
They moved their factory out from Suzhou provinces.
Yes.
To one of the Southeast Asia country.
To move to where?
I think it's somewhere Mindy.
Sorry, they're moving from Suzhou to where?
Myanmar.
Oh, Myanmar, the whole factory.
Yeah.
Okay. Who can do a move like that? Who can move from one country to another? It has to be a big company. Only big companies can do that. I wouldn't recommend that for a small company to do that. Because a big company like Adidas, they have the power to marshal the services around the new location and to make sure that they get because you need packaging, you need logistical support, you need all those surround services. It's not just your own factory and labour, it's not just labour and assembly. It's packaging, then service support and around that. So only buyers with that large bargaining power can marshal that service support around and can do things like that, but not small buyers, not small. They have to have that bargaining power to make a country move.
I think Adidas has closed all the plants in China already.
Pardon?
Adidas has already closed all the plants.
Yes, I'm not surprised. Yes, and they can do that. Okay, so Nike did that many years ago too. So these big companies can do that. Okay?
But the corresponding impact in China is many outsourcing company under Adidas, they also need to close down for some reason.
You mean many of the suppliers in the value in, yes. So, okay, so many of the suppliers to Adidas have to close down in China, what you're saying. I'm not surprised. And I understand that. Okay, and it's an industry by industry thing, and that's probably more prevalent in the apparel textiles industry. Okay? And that's horses for courses. What I mean is it depends on what is the product being made. So if it's a simple cut and sew product, then very easy to move from one country to another. But if it's cut and sew plus an extra design where maybe you have to have a tactile keyboard on a waterproof jacket that's currently being made across the border, then you can't necessarily move that to another country, all right, because you need the electronic ecosystem to go with the fabric and the fashion. Are you with me? So it depends how sophisticated a product is, number one. Number two, it depends how much power you have as a buyer to marshal that ecosystem in another country. Very good questions. I like them. Very good. Okay. I've got lots of stories. More question? I thought you just put your hand up, right? No, okay. Yes, what is your question?
I didn't have a question.
That's all right, you can make up one.
I thought, like, say, maybe the human rights issue in terms of the labor treating, say, Nike moved out because the factories were in bad conditions, the labor was, that's probably why they moved out. Like, was that sort of some of the considerations companies had, like, in terms of moving away from China?
You mean there was more transparency on the labour conditions than there were in moving to Southeast Asia, like Bangladesh and India?
Yeah.
So you're talking about the actual social pressures on the move?
The public concern.
Yes. First of all, I'm not expert on all the social pressures that go into these decisions, but yes, in the Western markets there's sensitivity to the treatment of labour in these developing countries. I don't think you can avoid that by moving from China to Bangladesh. It's an issue wherever you go.
Well, it's going to be like they have the power to say, okay, we're moving to, say, Myanmar,
yes.
for example, out of
yes.
right? So then they could say to the Myanmar government, we want to move here, but we want the cost of labour to be the same as China. And
now they'd want the cost of labour to be lower than China.
Or lower than China.
Yes, of course. Otherwise they wouldn't move.
China
yes.
would probably say no, because China will probably say, they would probably say, okay, the working conditions of the people will be better, but what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, like, they could have a better bargaining power, right?
Yes.
If they go to, say, Myanmar or something, and basically drop their whole operation there, and then say,
yes.
we want to undercut the price of China by X amount.
I think that's a global. Okay, I think part of your point is what are the motivations social motivations for moving one country to another one. I don't think that's a dominant factor that's driving the move. Okay. Having said that, yes, there is much more visibility on the social aspects of the supply chain, and so your big major designers and technology integrators in the consumer electronics are aware of that. Okay, the Apples, the HTCs, the Samsungs, they're all aware of that. We understand that, but I don't think it goes away by moving from one country to another. That doesn't change. So I acknowledge what you're saying. It is a big challenge. Okay, how do you manage the workplace given these greater sensitivity to the social aspects? Or in the workplace, how do you actually make sure that there's a whole product surround with respect to looking after the employees in the organisation? And there are consultants that are now selling their services to help factories across the border set up and maintain a harmonised workplace on the factory floor. Okay, and so what is that driven by? Is that driven by the world media saying thou shalt treat the employees better? I think it's driven more by the markets, because now the new generation across the border have much more say, much more power and opportunities to go where they want to go. They can move to other factories because there's so many factories available that want to hire them, and they will move. Okay, so how do you keep them? You just got to work very closely with them and understand what their motivations are working for you. And like that company in Sichuan province, giving them an English lesson every week was a way of non-financially rewarding these people that worked in the company. Okay, so these are issues that companies are still experimenting with, how to retain employees, because it's a big issue. How do you retain them when their wages are going up 15% every year without stop? Okay. But my point is that is not a driving reason for why people are moving. Okay, it might be an overall strategic global reason for why Adidas and Nike move from one country to another, but not for a reason for why a factory will move from Shenzhen inland. Okay, because another reason why you want to stay where you are is you've developed relationships with the government, so you can get VAT refunds very easily, processed easy, many other things processed easy. Once you move to another location, now you've got to start this relationship building again, not just with the value chain, but with the provincial government or the county government, so you get everything moving smoothly. Okay, so there's a lot more than just the labour cost that's driving the change, and that creates a lot of stickability. That is, factories will not move for several years after then the labour cost tells them to move. Okay, they'll wait till it gets too high. Okay, not at the crossover point, but not until labour gets much higher. All right, more questions. Very good questions. Let's keep moving. What you have here are cross-country comparisons. Why do we want to compare countries? Because when I talk to the suppliers, I want suppliers to think, look, if you have a USA customer as a major customer, yes, they're going to squeeze you. Yes, you're not going to make much profit, but they're going to, one way or another, help you improve in your technology capability. How do I know that? There you have it here. USA, when I ask the suppliers, what is the importance of the various qualification routines? Those suppliers that have a USA customer, technology is much higher than Europe, much higher than China, much higher than Japan, Korea, Taiwan. What about the other side? Visits. Who would visit more? The Taiwanese, the Korean, Japanese. We understand that because the Koreans and Japanese, they monitor their factories in China very, very closely. Okay, and they tend to work in their own ownership structure anyway. Okay, so they have their own ways of working. But apart from that, USA customers will visit more than the European customers. What about production efficiency? USA customers care more about that than others. Okay, so you get a USA customer, yes, they're going to squeeze you, they're going to be cost down every 5%, but you might learn something. And a good example of that is BYD went work with Motorola about 10 years ago. They were BYD was a consumer products battery manufacturer, and they worked with Motorola and tried to become approved supplier several times, and they failed, then they failed, then they failed, then they finally got approved supplier, and the rest is history. So you know BYD now make the cars, right? So why would you just try to become approved supplier, then fail, then you try again, you fail, you try again, fail, but you make it? You see, that's a learning process. So who taught BYD world-class manufacturing? In part, Motorola. Motorola's American. Okay, so that technology transfer, I tell suppliers, yes, you're a US customer. Okay, no, so we're not talking about Walmart, we're talking, remember, these are tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, okay? So they're not making things that are sold in Walmart overseas, all right? They're not making a basketball, they're not making footwear to Adidas or things like that. They're making resistors, diodes, capacitors, they're making switches, they're making anything in the electronic supply chain, okay? So they're supplying to your Apples, the HTCs, your Toshibas, the Huaweis, the ZTEs and all that, right? So what I'm saying is, if you have a US customer, if you have an Apple as your customer, you're going to learn a lot. Yes, they may screw you on price. Yes, they may push you down. Yes, they may ask you to invest first and then give them a sample and then reject you, which happens. Okay, in my interviews with them. Okay, you invest first. You invest the hundreds of millions, develop a sample. Oh, we don't want that. It's not up to our spec. Okay, that happens. Okay, but the minute that these big manufacturers find that you have a technology that no one else has, they will invest first. And then the sky's the limit for your future. Okay, so are you doing there are suppliers that are playing the approved game. That is, you become approved supplier, then use that to market, get your profit, get your IPO, buy your property. Okay, there's a lot of suppliers like that. But then there are the suppliers that have this niche strategy. The Taiwanese supplier that thinks that they make the best inductors in the world, and I believe they do. Right? You've got to have that mentality to be able to say, look, if you don't want to pay our price, you can go to our competition. Or that supplier that I spoke to in Shanghai that make carbon heat sinks, and they're the only one that makes that in the world, and they're looking to do IPO in about 2 or 3 years' time in Shanghai, if not earlier, and they have that special technology, and if they can get that moving with these major manufacturers, then that will change their game too. Okay, so as much as I say, maybe 70, 80% of the suppliers that we talk to have this normal game of just, there's an opportunity, let's just take the opportunity, even though it's not in our core market strategy. Like we make touch screens, we made car seat mats. What we do next year could be something different. But then there are really good suppliers that are really focused on the niche. And like this, the carbon heat sink supplier I talked about, okay? Like this inductor supplier I talked about. So there's different types out there. And so the good suppliers are the ones that have a niche and they have a focused strategy. They know what they want and they want to become world class at that. So I want to help suppliers to become world class at that. Okay? So when you look at it from that point of view, then you see buyers putting costs down, then what is it that you can learn from the buyer? All right? It may be okay to take that cost down, that price pressure, if you can learn something else like technology. Let's keep moving on this. All right? Cross-country comparison. So we look at the performance measurement importance, country of origin. Notice USA customer, technology, very high. Okay, how many of you work with USA people? Yes? Okay. All right. Technology. It's good. Look at that. Big difference. No? All right. What about performance measurement accuracy? Here's interesting. This question here, this is something that has never been done before. That is, you go into suppliers and you ask them, tell me about your system. Tell me about your accounting system, your ERP system. Do you use ABC? Do you have a customer satisfaction survey? How many of you have customer satisfaction survey? In your company? Do you have customer satisfaction survey? Do you have, pardon?
We don't have customers.
You're in banking, yeah?
Yes.
So do you have customer satisfaction survey?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure, okay. All right, okay. Which bank? No, let's not ask those questions. Okay. Customer satisfaction survey? Okay. Yes?
No, I'm in retail, so we don't have stuff like that.
But you should, right?
Yeah, but people come in into our shops to buy stuff, so we don't give them survey and ask, are you satisfied?
You'd like to know that, though?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, come and see me. I've got to help you with that, all right? So I tell the suppliers say to me, so how can I improve? Well, number one, look, do you have a customer satisfaction survey? No. Just start with asking a few questions to customers. Have a formal question and answer. The last thing you want to do is have an emotional discussion with a customer who is peeved off because you missed a delivery. And then in that email communication, that phone call communication, because they've obviously phoned you because they're angry. Like, do you phone people when you don't have a problem with them? Do you phone a customer or a supplier when everything's going perfectly? Put your hand up. Put your hand up if you contact them if there's a problem. Put your hand up if you have a problem with the employee or someone like that, you're going to contact them, right? If you don't have a problem, you don't talk to them, right? It's the same thing in the customer and suppliers. So I'm talking to the suppliers, they want to improve, right? And I said, well, okay, so tell me about, does your customer formally share the performance evaluation with you each year? I say, oh yeah, every week through email. No, you're not answering my question. We're talking about sit down, formally take me through the TDQSC, technology, delivery, cost, quality, service, all these dimensions, okay? And tell me how am I going and where should I improve and help me improve. Oh, no, the customer doesn't do that. Well, do you ask them for help on that? No. Should I? Yes, you should. Okay, because it's a point of improvement. You want to improve, then try to get an annual performance exchange. That is separate from the emotional exchanges that normally happen during the year when you miss the quality, you miss the delivery, and of course the customer is going to give you feedback and it's going to be angry and it's going to be filled with emotion. So what can you learn when an exchange is filled with emotion? You don't learn anything. Do you learn anything when your boss gets angry at you? No. Okay, but if you sit down and say, look, we've got to sit down, this is once a year, we do this anyway, so let's make this a learning exercise, and you away from those events when there was a heated exchange, then you're in a better position to learn. So I'm telling the suppliers this, get a system in place, get a basic accounting system, do your Excel if you want to, Excel system's fine, but get a formal customer survey being done every year, okay? So only, I think that's more than 25% of the suppliers we interviewed, more than 25% say their customer does not formally share their performance with them. Does not, okay? That's a problem, that's a huge problem. And you're talking about electronics industry where things should be much more formalised, okay? Like I understand in fashion, things are much more chaotic, design-led and subjective in what is a good design, what is a bad design. But in electronics, design is determined by engineering. Everything can be written down, okay? All right? Electronics should be the last thing where you find 25% of the suppliers I talk to do not have this formal sit-down exchange of information about how you're performing on these dimensions. Okay, so I tell the suppliers, you need to do that. You have to do that. All right. So if we look at, which type of customer from which country is having more exchange with their suppliers? Those from US, much more exchange. What are we talking about here? The importance of customer acquiring product technology, the importance of customer acquiring manufacturing process technology, importance of speeding up new customer product development. So we're talking about technological integration. What is the role of you as a supplier in being part of your number one customer's technological integration? Okay, technology product roadmap. Okay, and out of that, China, if they have a China customer, not very high. US customer, much higher. All right, Japanese customer, very high. Okay, so I tell suppliers, yes, work with a Chinese customer, great, but you may not learn as fast. Okay, you make money short term, but your long-term sustainability and survivability may be questionable. Okay, so that's the takeaway we're getting from this. I'm not from US, by the way, so it sounds like I'm saying US is good, is good, is good, is good, is good. I'm not from US. Okay, 我是澳洲人，澳大利亚. Okay, I'm from Australia. Okay, so let's keep moving along here because I'm talking a lot. Supplier selection practices. Notice visits to the supplier, use of technology, importance of productive efficiency. These are statistical differences. US is dominating, Taiwanese, Japanese customers dominating over Europe, much more. Amazing. All right, and cross-country comparison. What about monitoring? Who monitors more? Not Chinese customers, except when it comes to frequency of meetings by senior executives from your firm and the major customer firm. Of course, karaoke. We understand that. You will get that. But the yellow represents other countries dominating in the monitoring field, much more than European customers too.
But that's a bit unfair, like to put Europe there, right? Europe has a lot of different countries. So maybe Germany's numbers are much better than
yes.
Europe, right?
Yeah, I'll look into that. Let me have a look at that. You're right, because we know, Germany is the engineering capital. Absolutely understand that. Like even the German-owned factories in China are having, they're having their issues and problems too. But I agree with that. Okay, good point, fair point. Okay, so in summary, we want process improvement. So how do you get that? So I'm telling Chinese suppliers, focus on more formalization, have more formal communications, and have more formal engagement. So formal, I mean, we're going to sit down every 6 months or every 12 months, no matter whether we have to or not, and let's just go through. We want to improve. How do we do better? Okay? Because if you leave it to when the customer thinks they should, then it's usually when there's a problem, and that becomes emotional, and then the problem is driving the exchange, and the learning is not the objective with that. So let's process improvements. I'll focus on that. So future trends, we've got that. I want to finish up with questions, and let me just got that one. I've got 2 PowerPoint slides here. So there we go. We made the successful change. Notice, this is based on, let's have a look, 927. Okay, and I give you this handout, and this is the latest results that I've got. Notice, here is our range of products that we're looking at. The whole range. End products, PCBs, connectors, materials, ICs, generic components. Accurate forecasts. Here's the big thing I tell suppliers. I ask customers, I ask buyers, are you lying to your suppliers? So what do we mean by lying? What do we mean by customers, that is buyers, lying to suppliers? All right, we understand suppliers lying to customers. Okay. Oh yes, we can do that. Can you do it by next week? Yes, no problem. Okay, right. So we understand that. But what about the other way around? What do we mean by lying? What we mean is we put in an order with the supplier. Oh, we expect to order over the next 6 months. We want 10 container loads. But in the end, they only actually order 6 or 7. Okay. And then the supplier ramps up capacity for 10 and then finds out, oh, they only want 6 or 7. The supplier is left with inventory. Okay? And then that leaves a bad taste in the supplier's mouth in terms of the relationship with the buyer. So I ask buyers, are you lying to your supplier? Are you lying? And how do I know that? Because look, here's the percentage of accurate forecasts. I ask the suppliers, okay, if the bottom represents what they promise to buy from you, and the numerator, that was the denominator, the numerator is what they actually bought from you, your major customer, then there's a percentage. So here's the range. Okay, so we've got 400 out of 927, say between 80% and 100. How many of you agree that that's fair, right? Put your hand up, that's fair, right? But what about the other 500? What about the other 500? 60 to 80, 40 to 60. All right, look, 50 is saying 40 to 60%. How can you survive as a supplier when your customers only ordering half of what they promised to order? Okay? So I tell suppliers, you've got to push the customers on this. Now maybe for this case here, are these because the customer has more bargaining power? Suppliers don't have choice? Okay, maybe that's the case, and that's some of my ongoing analysis that I'm doing. But, all right, the range is out there. So as a buyer, you need to be over here if you want to develop the relationship with the supplier. What about relationship strength? All right, so we did measure that. Is that different between different countries? Yes. So if they have other Asia, it's very high on all of them. That means Japanese customer, Korean customer, Taiwanese customer, very, very high compared to USA customer, although that is much higher than European customers. I'm sorry, I need to differentiate out Germany on this. Okay, so no, I really appreciate you pointing that out. Thank you. So what about the relationship strength, the customer size? So if the customer, remember, we all know from your training that you don't want your major customer to take up too much of your sales, right? You don't want 70, 80%. Why? Because then the risk is very high. If the customer leaves you, you can die, right? And maybe you don't want 1 or 2% because then the customer thinks that you're not going to care about them anyway, okay? And it may not mean anything, okay? So a sweet spot is around 25, 30%. And so I've got this 20 to 35% as the red. So if you had less than 20% and more than 35, notice the red is much lower than either side of that. That's very interesting there. And maybe that's the case where the green, more than 35%, that suppliers are more proactive in actually managing that relationship. Okay? And less than 20%, maybe they don't care as much, but they find that, well, the relationship's okay. All right, so I'm still investigating that. Here's a very interesting one. We asked the suppliers, do they invest? Remember, when you become an approved supplier, there may be some investment at the start. If there is investment, the big question is, are you sharing that investment with me? Or are you, as a customer, making me put down the money on the new tooling? Okay, so new machine or new tooling, sometimes it's shared, sometimes it's not. When it is not shared, that is, or what we mean is when the supplier is putting down money and is investing more than 20%, then these things are much higher than when they're not investing much or taking much less share. Okay, so I need to cut that in a few more ways, because there are scenarios here where the customer is actually sharing, putting the money down, and not the supplier. And the customer would like to know whether this is high or low. Okay, so I haven't shown that here. What about measurement? Sharing performance measurement. Remember, I was very big on getting formal sharing of performance measurement. Yes, okay, 3 scenarios. One is no, the major customer does not share performance measurement. Okay, number 2, yes, they do annually, the red. And number 3, yes, they do more than annually. So very interesting, where the formal sharing happens and it's annually or more frequently, then that's a good thing. That's a very positive thing for the relationship. Can you see that? So if I'm talking to buyers, then be proactive in having this formal sharing than not. Okay? I talk to suppliers, I tell them, be proactive in this formal sharing, because you'll definitely have a chance to learn more than if you don't do it. For the buyer's point of view, you get a chance to improve the relationship. Okay? Right, so pretty interesting information there. What about major customer relationship strength? If the extended order quantity equals planned forecast quantity, notice, if it's more than 80%, that is, customers are not lying to the supplier. I promise to order 10 containers and I end up ordering 8 to 10 containers. There's your red. All right, notice relationship is much higher. This is the supplier's point of view, not the customer's point of view. See that? All right, that's what's special about this project. 927 suppliers are saying if their customer is not lying to them, then the relationship is much higher. Can you see that? That is very clear. Okay. All right. Now, what about change in trust and the relationship? Of course, we can measure it in terms of the trust. We ask them, compared to 3 years ago, do you trust your customer more, the same, or less? And that's pretty 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So these relationship measures are very consistent with the trust measures. So we have validation on that. What about supplier performance? Do you perform better if you have a USA customer, a Europe customer, or a Chinese customer? Europe customer, very interesting, increased profitability. Then what about country of origin? This is a better graph here. Increased market share with the China customer. And that may reflect partly the opening up of the domestic market in China. Okay, the opening up of the domestic market, and increased sales growth, definitely coming from here. But notice USA customers are pretty good, but there's not much difference between them on the other 2 dimensions. So let me just stop there for a moment and come back to some of your questions. Here we go. Question. Someone's involved with sourcing gifts, toys, collectibles. How do Chinese suppliers react to the volatile market? Who asked that one? You know, how do Chinese suppliers react to the volatile market? How do they react? Number 1, before they close down, they will operate at a loss in order to keep employees. They will run factories at 0 profit to keep employees. Okay? That's one thing I've noticed with the suppliers that we interviewed. Pardon?
Why is that?
Because if they believe that their product is still worth buying, even though the orders are not coming, they'll still run the factory. And partly, I think part of it is that they see their employees as family. So we're talking about Chinese-owned factories, not foreign-owned factories in China. Okay, so they see their employees as family, and they'll give them a job at no matter what the cost to the profits of the company. Okay, so they'll do that. Number 2, the volatile market, it's different in different cases. Let me give you a few stories about the market that these Chinese suppliers are facing. I'll give you enough graphs, so I don't want to hit you with more. I'll tell you a few stories. I think more important. There was one supplier, they were making dull and boring electric components, and they're making lots of money selling domestically. I said, how come you're making 10+% profit margin? How can you do that? You just got these passive components. Say, because our products are going into white goods, washing machines, refrigerators, and they're being sold into the inland provinces, and those sales are being subsidised by the China government. And so the market is bright. We're making lots of money. Okay, very interesting. So that's one interesting point. Then I talked to a LED supplier. So they make. Okay, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question now. Okay, what's the hottest sector in the electronics now, today? What's the hot sector? Pardon? No. It's hot, it's not really growing. I'm talking about fast. I'm talking about $150 billion industry around the world in the next 2 years. LED, yes, okay. LED infrastructure lighting around the world. Okay. So I went to a mobile phone expo. It was across the border. I think it was in June. I've gone to 25 of them in the last 18 months, so many. And it was very quiet. There weren't many people there. That's where I did see the Sunzai. I saw that phone for 1,000 yuan. And I saw all your phones for 1/10 the price. Okay. If you don't believe me, you can see the video on the web. All my videos of my expo visits are on the web. Anyway, and then I've been to another expo, LED expo in Shanghai. And then there was one in Guangzhou not long after, end of May, early June. And it was buzz, excitement, big difference. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So I went, talked to one vendor in Shanghai,